I am Dr. Mena Demisay, Vice President of Policy Analysis and Research at the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation. Let me just ask this question. How many of you have been to ALC before? All right, thank you for coming back. And raise your hand if this is the first time you've been with us at the great annual legislative conference. We welcome you to the 47th year. Thank you for joining us. We take pride in the work that our distinguished members of the Congressional Black Caucus do every day of the year, but especially at this time where they can convene, interact, share with you the work that they're doing on the ground, and so that we can also engage and interact and learn from you as well. You are at the Juvenile Justice Prevention and Reform for Black Youth panel happening, and I have the distinct honor of introducing to you one of the fiercest advocates in this space, who happens to also be our chairwoman of the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation, the Honorable Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee. Give it up for her. I'll be introducing her, but she's here. She sits on 3 very important congressional committees, a senior member of the House Committee on the Judiciary, Homeland Security, and newly appointed by the leadership as a member of the Crucial Budget Committee. She is currently the first female-ranking member of the Judiciary Subcommittee on Crime, Terrorism, Homeland Security, and Investigations, and is leading the way on criminal justice reform. Some of you may have joined us earlier and you heard her remarks at our National Town Hall this morning. She is currently serving her 11th term as a member of the United States House of Representatives. As someone who's been at the foundation for close to 10 years, it is a pleasure and distinct honor to work under her leadership at the foundation. She is a mover and shaker on the national platform, but she is just as engaged at the local, and when I say local, I'm talking about local like even from her to me local, in terms of everything we're trying to do from the policy perspective. And so for that, we are grateful and we thank her for her leadership. So what's going to happen is she will come up and make remarks, and then we will be followed by another distinguished member of our board who is no stranger to anyone in this room, Judge Greg Mathis, who will be moderating this conversation. So just a couple points of order before we get started. Congresswoman Val Demings will be joining us a little bit later in the panel.
I'm here.
Oh, there you are. Thank you for joining us. It is great to see you here. And again, you joined us. Thank you for your leadership and your 2-decade-plus history as a former police chief, the first female police chief of Orlando. Give it up for Congresswoman Val Demings. And we're also joined today as well by the Honorable Congressman Robert C. Scott of the great state of Virginia, ranking member on the Ed and Workforce Committee, a fighter, and literally has come to every single event we have planned, every issue forum. He is on the ground just as much as he is on Capitol Hill. Thank you, Congressman Scott, for the work that you do every day. I want to also introduce Yodit Tewolde Esquire, who you may have seen on many channels and news conversations on TV. She's a criminal defense attorney by training with the law office of Yodit Tewolde, and she'll be giving us her perspectives on juvenile justice reform from the legal space. Please give her a round of applause. Also joining us, Dr. Jason Johnson, political scientist, fellow and friend, and also at Morgan State University, as well as MSNBC commentator and political editor at The Root. You also have seen him on TV discussing critical issues of our time, and we're happy to join him. He will be leaving shortly, and so we will make sure to have some remarks since you won't be with us for the entire time, but thank you for joining us for this panel. And last but not least, our distinguished state representative from Louisiana, Ted James. Please give it up for him. And he will share his perspective on what is and should be done at the state level, and can share from a firsthand perspective the work that he's been doing in the great state of Louisiana, which is also the great state of our CVC chair, Cedric Richmond. So without further ado, please put your hands together for Congressman Sheila Jackson Lee.
I call her Dr. Minna. Give Dr. Minna a very large applause. She's our walking think tank. Let me welcome all of you on behalf of the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation. Really, I'm excited about the genesis of First Focus and the Future Focus series that comes through our collaboration with a number of organizations. We've been working with Annie Casey, but we are working with so many. And so many of you we have worked with, so many of your organizations, so many throughout the state. And I'm delighted to be able to have all of you here. It is good to see Cynthia Buggage, who represents the state black legislators in Louisiana. So that's about 25 or 30 votes for whatever we want to have. We're delighted about that. Well-trained in Houston, Texas, in the 18th Congressional District. You know that was coming. World Youth Foundation, are any of you in the room at this time? All right, they are scattered. That's a group that made it out of the hurricane and came here, and I just want to acknowledge them. All others who have advocated, worked, fought for, standing in the gap for juveniles and the reform of the juvenile justice system, raise your hand. Raise your hand. If you're standing in the gap, if you're on the battlefield, raise your hand. Give all of them, let them clap for themselves for a very big applause. Again, it really is a privilege. This morning I started out at a homeless shelter and interacting with some of our brothers as they were making the journey of reformation and change. One of the phrases or comments that I made was out of the Bible in 1 Peter and talked about living hope. And that's what I think we are dealing with as we look at juvenile justice reform, and I'm delighted. And I will make note of these wonderful individuals again that are here to provide us their insight and their voice. One in particular will be the moderator, and I know that he may be judging on television, but he is an activist. He is a civil rights activist. He knows and has seen both the light side and the dark side, if you will, and he is committed to justice. But let me acknowledge Val Demings, a former chief of police in her district, Orlando, who should be on, oh, she's here. Oh, and I have to really build it up. I was waiting to build it up when you walked in the room, but you were here. Val Demings, a member of the United States Congress, a member of the Congressional Black Caucus, former chief of police. We're so blessed to have her insight. And I tell you, just for a moment, and I will get away from this mic, but we were on the floor the other day about a bill that had a fishnet that could have gotten a whale dealing with MS-13. I know many of you know MS-13. None of us will suggest that there is not something that you need to deal with. But if you take a fishing net to catch a whale and there's no whale in front of you, and you're going to catch 13-year-olds and 14-year-olds that are standing on the corner, listen to this. If 5 people stand on the corner, and they are on the corner, and they are a group, an organization, a boys club, or whatever it is, they could be considered in this bill to be conspirators and to be labeled terrorists. And it was so provocative and important for the former chief of police, Val Demings, to get up, as she says, and I've been in law enforcement for 25 years, and told them they were wrong. Thank you, Congresswoman Demings, and likewise, thank you for your commitment to juvenile justice reform. It is good, as I said, to have both a serious individual, a knowledgeable individual who is nationally renowned, and that is Judge Gregory Mathis, who you'll hear from in just a moment. Is he over here in the corner? He's going to be our wonderful master of sermon. He will be introduced, but he is my friend. Give him a very big hand. He will get another introduction, but I thank you for being here. Member of the Board of Directors of the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation. Thank you so very much. Chairman Bobby Scott, because that is what honor that he deserves. Long years, long standing in the juvenile justice reform and the criminal justice reform, brazen, unapologetic about what he sees as the wrongness of a wrong-headed criminal justice situation, and I will call him the father of ending mandatory minimums. Give Congressman Bobby Scott a very big hand. And then I want to acknowledge Ms. Tewaldi, that is with her own expertise that we're delighted to have her, criminal defense attorney. There are many stories that she will be able to tell. I'm so good that she's on that wonderful side, though I have a wonderful prosecutor that's, and I know you love to find good prosecutors that can work with you and deal with what the law really is. So let's give her a very big hand for the work that she's doing. Thank you, Dr. John Johnson, Professor, Morgan State University. Looks like I've just seen you at MSNBC commentator. Thank you for your fairness and understanding, contributor and politics editor at The Root. You all have been all over. Thank you for the great work of telling the truth through The Root and many other sources of information. Give him a very big hand. State Representative Ted James from Louisiana. We're delighted. You are from the home of Cedric Richmond. We know the work that's been done in criminal justice reform. We want you to keep on keeping on. Thank you so very much. Let me share a few points with you, and they will be a few points. I always am reminded of the story of Calif out of New York, the late young man who was in Rikers Island on the grounds of having stolen a backpack of an individual. I said knapsack, was a backpack in those descriptions. The owner of the backpack was out of the country at the time the backpack allegedly was stolen. I imagine he had his backpack with him. And Calif was sort of in between that age of the felony and being a young person and being over that age that he could be in an adult jail. He maintained his innocence. For 2 years, they kept him incarcerated. 2 years. When he finally got out, and by the way, in solitary confinement, with all of the horrors of that, feces around, beating up because he wouldn't confine himself or wouldn't conform himself. And he ultimately got out, and people celebrated only because a public defender pushed his way into the case. I met his mom and his brother, and we introduced Calif's law to end solitary confinement to codify it because President Obama had set a standard for the federal prison system not to have it exist, but we wanted it to be from the bully pulpit. And tragically, the story is well known that he committed suicide, having come out, gone to college, tried to stand in against the horrors of what he had experienced, and his mother recently passed. We don't know how many stories there are, because some will say, well, you know, they don't do solitary confinement. You know, if there's one person there that doesn't deserve to be there as a juvenile, that's one too many. That's one too many. We need to have broad sweeping laws that eliminate that kind of tragedy. So what I've done is I've broken these elements down as we collaborated together. And so we have introduced the RAISE Act as well. And the RAISE Act specifically deals with, we're trying to give Congress the ability, do right, you know, let's do right. The RAISE Act, of course, is one that provides judges different alternative sentencing. Many people don't know in the juvenile system, you could come in for stepping on a crack, and I mean not crack cocaine, stepping on a sidewalk, stepping off the sidewalk. You don't really have a sentence. And you can stay there as long as someone thinks you need to be there, or you're creating havoc inside, or you don't conform, and you're just there. Parents don't even know and understand that process. So we want alternative sentencing so that people do not consider themselves with a future, like future focus. And then, of course, the fair chance. Many people have introduced ban the box for adults and adult prisoners, and this specifically goes to banning the box for young people. And making a difference for young people so that they don't have to introduce, if you will, that into their life when they're applying for college or a job. Just like I was just across the hall with women who had been abused and then ultimately got arrested because they were associated with their spouse or boyfriend, and then they were in jail. They're a felon. You know what this woman told me? I cannot even see my sons because tragically I'm a felon and I was in jail, and tragically my sons got in trouble, and we can't even live together. This is the kind of confusion in the criminal justice system. So let me, as I close, mention one point. We know racial profiling exists. Juveniles get caught up in racial profiling. They get caught up in the educational system or in schools Why are they the most misbehaved young African American boys? Why is there another alternative for them? And then just to end on what is happening under Attorney General Sessions, who is literally undoing every humane act that President Obama had to do through the executive order process because we couldn't move the bills, though we had momentum in the United States Congress around Congressman Scott's bills that he has had, the Promise Act. We had momentum, we were ready, but there were blockers. And let me cite one who now happens to hold the position of the Attorney General of the United States of America, who comes with a spirit that there is no law too strong for his viewpoint. There's not enough sentencing that can go out on people that makes him happy. If you're getting 50 years or 100 years, that's the way it should be. And he's telling his prosecutors, charge people up with everything they have. Don't let them get one charge, get them 25 charges. You know what that does to people? And so we have work to do. And as you listen to these presenters, know what obstacles we are confronting. Just because you look to one direction and say that person is elected, look at the person that's appointed that has jurisdiction with no impunity over the Department of Justice that is now unjust. And here is a quote from the Mobile Register. This is from 2 decades ago, now the Attorney General of the United States, General Sessions. If I were Attorney General, the first thing I'd do is see if I couldn't increase prosecutions by 50%. Well, he is there doing it now, and if you're 12 years old, or 10 years old, or 18 years old, or however old you are, and you get caught up in a system that he has dominance over, you can be assured he wants you prosecuted. This is an important session today. It's about saving lives, saving our children, and I hope that you will listen attentively and take the tools and go back home and be a fighter for our children. Thank you all so very much for being here, and I look forward to working with you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Congresswoman Jackson Lee, for your leadership and your remarks. We are now ready to move to the conversation so you can learn about the work that is being done. I have the distinct honor, of course, of introducing to you our moderator for today's discussion, Judge Greg Mathis, who is a national figure known for his advocacy, campaigns for urban youth and equal justice. His inspirational life story of a street youth who rose from jail to judge has provided hope to millions who watch him on the Emmy-nominated award-winning television court show, Judge Mathis Each Day. Judge Mathis has received numerous awards and keys to the city from government officials and is the recipient of honorary doctorates from both Florida A&M University and Eastern Michigan University. He has been recognized for his efforts by numerous newspapers, magazines, and television networks, and has appeared on such shows that you've all seen before, including his court show. Let me also just say on behalf of our chairwoman and our president and CEO, A. Shanice Washington, we've been blessed to have him as an active leader on our board. He shows up at everything that we do on the ground, and we appreciate him for his service and the work that he has done and committed to the lives of young Black people and our community. So please put your hands together for our moderator, Judge Greg Mathis.
Thank you all. Let me first start out, as I always do, with members of any audience I address, particularly of our community, and that is by thanking you for your support. I'm in our 18th year on television. We're second only to Oprah as the longest-running African-American show. Couldn't do it without you all. Couldn't do it without you all, so thank you. And many of you watch, and you know that some of my adjudication involves a little humor, because these are small claim cases, etc. And on the other hand, there's really nothing funny when I leave that bench about what we see going on in our community. And so when I leave the bench, I change over into a committed activist and a committed fighter for equal justice for our people. As Congresswoman Jackson says, and we're so proud to have her as both the chairman of the board of the foundation, but also as perhaps one of our most distinguished leaders in Congress. And I like the fact that she's such a great grassroots leader from the Ivy Leagues. That has always been intriguing to me, an Ivy League leader in the grassroots community. Give her another hand, please. And so I have been, quite frankly, raised in the civil rights and urban politics all my adult life, beginning coming from college, working for the mayor of Detroit, Coleman Young, and then later as an aide to Reverend Jackson, where I now serve as chairman of the board of Rainbow Push. So all my adult life, this is the fight I've been in. I didn't just wait until television, didn't wait until I was somebody to start giving back. I gave back time I left college and will continue to do so. And lastly, I wanted to give some insight as to what we're doing today and also my observation before we get right to the panel. I sat on President Obama's task force of My Brother's Keeper. I sat in the criminal justice committee of the task force, and we studied this issue that we're talking about today. And what we came to conclude is that much of what we see, the destruction and the negligence and abuse toward our young people is provoked in many instances by the negative stereotypes that are projected onto our young people, and black men in particular. We see in the news media images of, every image that you see of African American men, for the most part, they're looking crazy, they're talking crazy, and they're acting high on television, when in fact most of our young black men are doing the right thing. They're going to HBCUs, they're going to community colleges, they're in skilled trades, they're going to church. There are many things other than the criminals that they're projected in the stereotypes. And so after studying, we concluded that one, the stereotype was that all black men and black youth were angry. Two, we concluded that there was a belief based on these stereotypes that we were violent. And thirdly, and you all might find a little humor in this, but I don't know whether it's true or not, but they say we're sexual predators, and then they are worried about us being more, how do you put that, endowed than themselves. I'm telling you, this is part of the study. And this is how it concluded, and this is kind of the example I give. One, if you're angry, we're scared of you in the workplace. Has a little effect on the workplace for black men too. If you're violent, we're really scared of you. Thirdly, instead of you looking and chasing our women, we'd be glad instead to look at yours. So we don't want you in the workplace. We'll bring your women, put them in our workplace. Give some thought to that. Don't y'all put me off TV, but that's the analysis. I've been on 18 years. That's all right. My wife, Linda, saved all the money. She won't give me a dime. So we'll be all right if they put us off, I hope. But I'm going to speak the truth. And the essence of it is they demonize black men and black youth. And that's what we also see in law enforcement misconduct. And the demonization has come from these same stereotypes. In fact, the police officer that shot and killed Mike Brown in Ferguson, one of the quotes he made, he said that when he saw Mike Brown, he said his eyes turned red like a demon. He used that exact quote. And as a result, what do you do with demons? You shoot demons. The Christians will tell you cast them out. Same thing, kill them. That's what the Bible said he'd do. And so when you demonize black men and black youth, no one cares what you do to them. Demons are supposed to be killed. Demons are supposed to be locked up. Demons are supposed to be criminalized. And so those are the things, in my opinion, and the opinion of many others, that we have seen. And what some of the solutions are we found on the My Brother's Keeper task force was we must, of course, address one of the most important civil rights issues of our time, and that's the education system. Because we have a failed education system that ultimately does not prepare our young people for the workforce. And so they turn to crime and drugs. Crime to try and ease away the pain if they're drug addicts, crime to try and survive on the streets because they have no economic options. And as a result, most of them who are involved in the criminal justice system or involved in crime end up in prison. And then what happens? Those prisons are privatized to make money off those they failed to educate. And then we also seen some of the solutions. Some of those solutions we saw were to pour more resources into after-school programs where young people don't have, if you put enough programming around young people, they don't have time or they're too tired to get in trouble. Go to school, you get up, go to school, 8 a.m., put them in the after-school program from 3 to 6. Perhaps they're in a sports program or band or whatever it might be. They're there until 8 o'clock. They get home, they eat, they clean their room, watch a little television, and fall out because they're too tired to do anything other than that. And so it's that structure, that after-school programming and structure that we found was another solution. We also found that electing judges and prosecutors and having great criminal defense lawyers as well, and also sheriffs turned congresspersons. That was a great benefit we see in us electing folks that could relate to who we are, those who are policing the communities that reflect their narrative and their reality. And so it is that when we have law enforcement and when we have judges and prosecutors whom we elect that know our reality, we get more and fairer justice. And so it is our obligation, because when we have a prosecutor we've elected and they send everything to the grand jury, and I don't know if you all know it or not, but the grand jury does not allow, when you're in that grand jury room, only the prosecutor talks. There's no defense lawyer provided for the young person or the adult that has to face a grand jury. And the prosecutor just argues and tries to convince this grand jury to indict. And guess what? 90% of them do. 90% of all grand jury prosecutions or investigations end up in an indictment. And so we must elect prosecutors who are fair, who understand our reality. Judges, second chance judges. I had a second chance judge. Many of you have heard my story. And it was because of that second chance judge who said, we're not going to give you 5 years that it is required for carrying a gun. Instead, I'm going to give you probation and require that you advance and get a GED and go to college. And I think I went a little further. However, it was those type of judges that we must elect. Now, I want everyone to have an opportunity to give some background on their position on particular juvenile justice issues, as well as in their careers, anything they'd like to present, and then we'll, of course, get question and answer. Congressman Scott.
Thank you so much, and thank you for your good work and leadership in the criminal justice area. I want to thank Val Demings for her contributions to criminal justice, and of course Sheila Jackson Lee, who is the ranking Democrat on the crime subcommittee, making policy for us, and for her leadership as chair of the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation. I'd also like to thank our other panelists. But my job was to give a kind of overview of the juvenile justice system and update you on what we've been doing on the Education and Workforce Committee in juvenile justice. As some of you know, that juvenile courts began over 100 years ago by the states, based on the emerging legal theory that children should not be held fully responsible for their actions, a theory borne out by scientific research into impulse control and brain development. The capacity to rehabilitate children became the focus rather than punishment of the children. Congress first articulated national standards for juvenile justice in the Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention Act of 1974. A long overdue authorization for this bill has created guidelines that protect children in the juvenile justice system in each state. All states have to comply It's been 15 years since it's been reauthorized, but there have been advancements in that time in research and an expansion of evidence when it comes to prevention of youth incarceration and delinquency. We've seen positive results from states that states have had from investing in alternatives to incarceration and secure detention. We've seen documented power of evidence-based policies that both have in reducing crime and saving money. And we've realized the role of the trauma plays in the lives of our disengaged youth and what it takes to get them back on track. We know what to do about this because several years ago there's an Attorney General's report that unfortunately nobody read because it came out the same week as the Sandy Hook shootings, but it showed that children exposed to trauma are much more likely to commit crimes or be victims of crime as a result of that trauma. And that report went into detail about what we need to do. All prevention and early intervention, nothing in the criminal justice system. And so we know what to do, we just have to follow that report. In addition, there's been a key shift in public opinion. We've started to see more and more people speaking about the importance of prevention and early intervention and crime policy, both in juvenile and in the adult systems. Most of the time, in crime policy, we just make up slogans and sound bites and call that policy. But when some of those slogans and sound bites actually increase the crime rate rather than decrease it, but we've seen promising moves on both sides of the political spectrum to focus away from so-called tough on crime to smart on crime or right on crime. You've seen people like Van Jones and the ACLU join Newt Gingrich and the Koch brothers in an intelligent, smart on crime approach. So both in the 114th and the 115th Congress, the House has passed the bipartisan reauthorization of the Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention Act. The bill includes necessary improvements to federal policy, grounded in facts, and proving that public investments in a continuum of trauma-informed care and alternatives to incarceration can produce positive results for at-risk youth. And this will result in reduced crime and saving money. It requires for the first time that state juvenile justice plans take into account scientific research, recognizing the importance of prevention and early intervention, making sure that the policies are evidence-based. Now, we shouldn't have to legislate evidence-based, but if you don't put that in there, you're going to end up with the slogans and sound bites. The bill also encourages states to consider promising practices, such as programs to ensure youth have access to public defenders when they're in juvenile court, use of problem-solving courts, like drug courts, as an alternative to probation and confinement, and efforts to inform and aid juveniles in sealing and expunging their juveniles' records, and also programs to address the unique needs of girls in or at risk of entering the juvenile justice system. All of that has to be in the state plans. Finally, the bill retools the current Title V local delinquency prevention grant programs and retitled the Youth Promise Incentive Grants for local delinquency prevention programs. Now that's modeled after the Youth Promise Act that I've been working on for many years. That has a specific process that's important. You first have to figure out the status, what the status quo is, how much are you spending on crime, incarceration, and teen pregnancy, because if you have a crime reduction program, you're going to reduce teen pregnancy. Come up with an evidence-based plan. As you implement the plan, make sure that you're evaluating it, and at the end, when people save money like you know they're going to, make sure you identify the savings and have them kick back and reinvest the savings so that once the program gets going, the reinvestment will keep them going. Now, we have a choice. You can have this kind of program or the slogans and sound bites that have got us to the point where we lead the world in incarceration, so much so that one study showed that we lock up so many people, it's counterproductive. You got so many children being raised by parents in prisons. You got so many people with felony records, can't find jobs. You're spending so much of the Justice Department budget on prisons that you don't need when it could be put into constructive, evidence-based crime reduction proposals, that it's actually counterproductive. And that's at about 430 per 100,000. We're at 700 and some per 100,000. 10 states lock up blacks at the rate of 4,000 per 100,000. We're so far over the line that we've done studies that showed in some areas you can show that in a community of 100,000 people, they may be spending $50 to $100 million a year in counterproductive incarceration, when that money could be more effectively used for prevention, early intervention services like the Youth Promise Act. Now, the House bill includes all that. It's been over in the Senate last year. They didn't get around to doing anything. It's over there this year. There are a couple of technical problems in getting it out of the Senate, but hopefully next year they'll get, sometime in the next few months, they will pass the reauthorization of the Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention Act, so that next year, when we have this session, we'll be talking about the good work being done by the newly authorized Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention Program. Right. So thank you, Judge, and thank you, Sheila Jackson Lee, for bringing us together, and I look forward to the rest of the panel. Thank you.
For our next guest, let me just recognize one of our national leaders who is here with us today, and that is Sister Claudia Muhammad. She's the head of, here she is in the front row, say hi. She's the national representative for the Nation of Islam and Minister Farrakhan's head of protocol. And we are glad to have her here. Many of you, if you know anything about the Nation of Islam, you know that they have done the best work in transforming and reforming the lives of black men who have fallen through the cracks, been victims, or otherwise gotten involved in the criminal justice system. And until we figure this out, maybe all of them need to join the Nation of Islam, huh, Sister Muhammad? Until we figure it out. All right, our next guest I want to introduce, and Dr. Jason Johnson. Dr. Johnson is a professor, political analyst, and a political public speaker. She is the author of The Political Consultants and Campaigns, One Day to Sell. She's a tenured professor in the School of Global Journalism and Communication at Morgan State University in Baltimore. Give her a hand, and thank you for coming.
Apparently. That's me.
See, you're in trouble. She pointed y'all out, and that Congresswoman Lee was just giving us some props, and I love her dearly too. She does the best work that you might want from any staff member, but today she's getting locked up.
Not a problem.
Make a fool out of me. I told her, I said, point out each person, give me the name. She said, oh yeah, with the second one, oh yeah, that's Jason Johnson. Oh yeah. I said, oh okay, yeah, that's a pretty lady for the name Jason. I said, but nonetheless. And then come to find out it's this ugly Negro called Jason. Go ahead, your turn.
I have to speak quickly because I actually have to run to another meeting. I'll say this very quickly. I'm on a panel here with some very important politicians, people who have direct experience in criminal justice, people who are fighting and arguing in the courts, and they do tremendous day-to-day work, which is something I both admire, and it's to the benefit of the entire community. My perspective is slightly different, and I'll say this fairly quickly. As the politics editor of The Root, and as somebody who works as a political analyst on MSNBC, my role in these discussions when it comes to criminal justice is to be the giant flashlight, right? To sort of be the bat signal in the sky that tells our community where we need to focus our time and our attention and energy when these criminal justice issues occur. Because believe it or not, above and beyond the problems that we have with sometimes the behavior of some police officers, with white supremacy, with an attorney general who wants to sort of pretty much exterminate as many people as he can, or at least make our lives extremely difficult, the fact of the matter is, in many cases, our community actually doesn't know what's going on. We don't know, and I don't blame people for that, but it's the job of The Root, it's the job of people who work as political analysts to get on the air and say, hey, let's pay attention to this issue that's happening in Cleveland. It was journalists that really brought to our attention what happened with Tamir Rice. It's journalists who are the ones who are bringing to attention what happened with Mike Brown. It's journalists who are bringing to our attention what are the resources that we can bring to the table in order to make corrections when justice is not served in criminal justice situations. So I want to bring to your attention just one very important case that's happening now and some things that you all may or may not be able to do. How many people here, show of hands, have heard of Leon Ford Jr.? Okay, good. That's why I'm doing my job. Leon Ford Jr., you should look him up. He's a fantastic young man. He was a mechanic. He was a detailer of cars. He was an amateur boxer. In 2013, you can see this video online. He was pulled over aggressively and unnecessarily by Pittsburgh police. Remember, these are the same Pittsburgh police who had a notorious jump out gang that used to jump out of their police cars and beat up and abuse black men and women on a regular basis under the claims that they were engaged in the drug trade. They told Leon Ford Jr. to pull over. As he pulled over, one police officer came to one side of his car while the other officer was asking questions. As he was attempting to get out his ID and information, the other officer actually jumped into the side window and began grabbing at him. He was afraid. He ended up pushing the clutch in his car. Car starts driving forward. The police officers shoot into the car. They shot him 5 times. 5 times. Pulled him out of the vehicle. Did not provide any medical care. The reason that the medical services ended up arriving is because a nun literally saw him on the ground bleeding. He lived. The police then sued him for assault 3 times. He won all of those cases. This week begins his civil trial against those officers. That's the kind of thing that we do as African American journalists. We bring the light to those kinds of stories and those kinds of situations. Tweet about it, write about it, pay attention to it. Call your members of Congress, call people here at the CBC, call your white, black, whatever members of Congress, because it's only when we pay attention, it's only when we say that we love our people the most and that they deserve justice, that the criminal justice system slowly begins to move towards the fair treatment that we've all demanded since being brought here. Thank you very much.
Our next panelist I'd like to introduce. She is a U.S. Congresswoman from the 10th District of Florida. She was the longest serving and the first African-American female police chief in Orlando, which we never saw an uprising because we haven't heard of many, if any, killings of unarmed people when she was there as police chief. And so we thank God for her. In fact, she reduced crime by 40%. Historic reduction in crime while serving as police chief. I've served on panels with her. I know her and I regard her as a friend. But raise your hand if you're Val Demings. I ain't getting in no more trouble here. You know I know you are. I'm just trying to stay out of trouble. I just got it.
At least you didn't call me a man, Judge,
That's
so I'm
right.
good. You called him a woman, but I'm good.
Val,
Thank you so very much. And I also want to give kudos to Representative Sheila Jackson Lee. You talk about a bad member of Congress. She's my mentor. When I first got, she doesn't know that, but I just kind of, I was urged to just stand next to Sheila when I first got here. And I just thank her for her leadership and for being willing to share the space with this new member of Congress. So let's give Sheila Jackson Lee a round of applause. Also, I want to thank Judge Mathis. I did have the honor of serving on some panels with him. And let me just say this, y'all. I was a candidate. And I served on a panel with Judge Mathis and Roland Martin. Now, y'all know I'm brave, huh, as a candidate for Congress. But we had a good time talking about some very serious issues. When asked to sit on this panel, I had some ideas about what I wanted to say. And I've kind of reevaluated some of those things. Because, ladies and gentlemen, this is a critical topic. It's an important topic. And as a mother of 3 black sons, Our future is in jeopardy without them. When I look in this room and I see the young men, I'm partial because I have 3 sons. When I see their faces and the hope and dreams, I can see it in their eyes. We've got to do something because we do have a nation that's worth saving. I also want to thank my colleague, Bobby Scott, who's the smartest member. He's the smartest member in Congress, not just in the CBC, but in Congress, and I thank him so much for the honor of serving with him. I spent 27 years in law enforcement, and I had the honor to work my way up through the ranks to become the first woman chief of police at the Orlando Police Department. Before I became the chief, though, I was a social worker. And so I went to the job of chief of police in Orlando with a social worker's heart. I remember my training sergeant, when I first was sworn in, said to me, "Well, what'd you do before you came here?" I said, "I was a social worker." And the sergeant said, "Well, let me tell you right now, police work is nothing like social work." So because I was new and I had been warned to keep my mouth shut and listen, I didn't say anything then. But you know what I found out after about 6 months on the street? If you're doing the job of a law enforcement officer right, police work is a heck of a lot like social work. I was on a panel, or attended a panel for women and girls yesterday, and there was a mom on the panel whose daughter was incarcerated, and she gave me kind of an opening statement to say to you today as we talk about our criminal justice system, particularly our juvenile justice system, and saving our young males. She said this, her words, not mine, but I believe them, and I want to share them with you. Because we're speaking truth to power today. There was a young woman here with that shirt on. Y'all know the very famous saying, the very famous person who said it, truth to power. Well, what is the truth? This is what she said, but I fully agree with her. She said, there are some bad people in the world. There are some people in the world who will hurt you and hurt me, and won't care anything about doing that. Those are not the people that we are talking about today. When we talk about mass incarceration and stacking charges up and all those things, we're not talking about this group of people. People that will hurt you, who deserve and need to be locked up. I'm not talking about them today. I'm talking about the second group of people that she talked about. And those are the ones, young people who just make mistakes. I don't necessarily agree with the saying, and I know we've all heard it a long time, that birds of a feather flock together. I don't necessarily agree with that, and the reason is this, because I think there are a lot of good children who just get pushed down the wrong road. And they're vulnerable, they come from good families and have all the right teaching and training, and they're lured to do bad things. I think those children are the ones that we are here to talk about today, who deserve to have a second chance. Incarceration is not the answer necessarily for those kids. And then she talked about a third group of people who were incarcerated, and she said those are innocent people. Yeah, they are. I locked a lot of folk up in my life. I tried not to lock up any innocent folk, though, y'all. But there are some, and when that happens, it is a breakdown in the system. But let me say this. As a law enforcement officer, a social worker who worked with foster care children, incarceration is a consequence of a breakdown in something. It is the breakdown of the family unit. It is the breakdown in our education system. It is a breakdown in mentoring programs for our young men. Look, I raised 3 sons. I could teach them how to be kind and loving and nice and polite, but I could not teach them how to be men. Only a man can teach them that. Today, there are 17 children who are incarcerated today in the Orange County Jail in Orlando, Florida, where I live. Now, these children have been waived over to adult court because they have committed serious violent felonies. They've committed murder or robbery or rape, serious violent felonies, but they come with some interesting statistics. All of them come from single-parent homes. Now, don't y'all go out of here saying, you know, that Congresswoman said if you come from a single parent, look, I know a whole lot of good, decent folks doing some amazing things that come from single-family homes, but raising children is difficult enough in a two-parent home. It is extra tough in a single-family home where a single-parent home where you're trying to work 2 or 3 jobs just to keep a roof over the head and food on the table. All of them are undereducated. Either they dropped out of school or their attendance was leading to that direction. And all of them come from poverty-stricken areas. So we can talk about the criminal justice system, and Lord knows, I spent 27 years in law enforcement. I know a whole lot of good police officers, but I also know there are some bad police officers as well. But we've also got to address, they don't get a pass, or they shouldn't. I certainly did all I could to hold them accountable. But society shouldn't get a pass either. When education systems fails our children, when the process somehow leaves our children out. And I'm going to end on this point, and then we can move on. In 1965, President Johnson commissioned a panel to look at policing in America. And 20 people on the panel, they came back. The results were this. This was in 65. That we needed to hire the brightest and the best policemen to do the job. It was 52 years ago, y'all. It was okay. Policemen to do the job. We need to make sure they have the best training and the best equipment to do the job. But we've also got to look at unemployment. We've got to look at lack of housing. We've got to look at being undereducated or not educated. We've got to look at poverty-stricken areas. Now, here we are talking about the same issues. Police don't get a pass, but neither should anybody else in serving our children, because it's a nation that's worth saving. And so I want to thank you so much for this opportunity to serve on this panel, and I look forward to our further discussions. Thank you all.
Thank you. We're going to do something that may get me in trouble, but I think they'll appreciate it, our next 2 panelists, as well as you all. And that is, I'm going to allow them to give the first answers to the questions because I want the audience to participate, and we only have about 45 minutes left. And so I'd like to introduce Yodit Tuoldi, and she is a criminal defense attorney, and she's done much in our community as a legal analyst and a news commentator as well. And before becoming a defense attorney, she served as a prosecutor for several years with the Dallas County District Attorney's Office. I like those type of prosecutors. You become a criminal defense lawyer and you know both sides, and you have the sensitivity and understanding of what these the accused are going through. And then we have State Representative Edward Ted James, and he is a cum laude graduate of Southern University Law Center. He also has worked in helping to rebuild Louisiana in the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina and Rita by joining the office of Governor Kathleen Blanco. And as the governor's policy advisor on housing and community development, Ted assisted in securing a $25 million investment into the Louisiana Housing Trust. So we are glad to have him. He also serves or has served on the Louisiana Advisory Commission on Intergovernmental Relationships with the sitting governor, Bobby Jundell. Give him a hand as well. And we know the subject matter, and so we are all equipped here to answer those questions that you might have. Do we have someone to organize the questioning? And as we prepare for that, I want to introduce the city clerk also from the city of Detroit. She is one of the highest ranking elected officials in Detroit. She's a former college classmate of mine, Janice Winfrey. Give her a hand. Stand up, Janet. You know, my wife Linda, we all went to Eastern Michigan University together, and at one point I had to choose. And I chose Linda over Janice, and however, I helped her get elected, so I think it balanced itself. Just kidding. Janice and I never even broke bread together. She was just a student leader, and I was trying to follow in her footsteps. Janice wasn't even there when my wife Linda came, but I thought that'd be a little fun. First question there.
Any questions, please raise your hand. Everybody's still getting their laughs in? Okay, please ask a question, state your name, affiliation, and your question, please.
Good afternoon. My name is Kenneth Henry, and my question is, throughout the day today, I've heard a lot about Calif Broader, and I think we all know the story. There is legislation that's sort of been around for a couple of sessions, 114, and I know it's back again this session. What's the likelihood that that legislation will get passed? And I did hear you, Congressman Scott, when you talked about the juvenile justice reform. Is one more critical than the other, or do they both have the same relevance? And can we do something to get Calif Broader's H.R. 47 passed? Thank you.
Well, didn't know we'd be so specific with the first question. Sorry about that. You all will certainly get the next. Congressman Scott is the only one who can answer that question, I believe. Oh, I'm sorry. We have other Congresswoman, but Congressman Scott serves on that committee, and he's been a leader in that area.
What was the other one?
I'm sorry? H.R. 47. H.R. 47.
With Calif Broader's bill? But your larger question, do you want to just restate?
Sure. Okay, the larger question is, given the fact that we do have a problem with juvenile justice, what can we do to assure that if our juveniles are going to be detained, even though we're talking about preventative strategies, what can we do to ensure that those who are being detained with dignity?
Our prosecutor turned criminal defense lawyer is well prepared to answer such a question.
You know, I actually wasn't even listening to the question.
Well, we're going to go to Ted then. State Representative Ted. Were you listening, Ted?
I was listening, Judge.
All right. Let's go ahead.
You know, one thing that's largely has been missing is the attention that you guys should be paying in your local and state government. I don't know the likelihood of those bills passing, but I do know that these same issues are addressed in all 50 states. And I'll tell you that one thing that we have to talk about is our in-school suspension rate, because we are setting our kids up for a pattern of incarceration based on how disproportionately our young people are suspended from school. And I know that young black kids aren't inherently worse than young white kids, but we are suspended at more alarming rates. But with that, we have to do a better job of training. You asked, what can you do? We need to teach you how to advocate, right? One thing that I tell folks, your civic responsibility doesn't end at the ballot box. So once you push that button for us, it's incumbent upon you to continue to push us and hold our feet to the fire. But we also have the obligation to teach you how to advocate, because it is a very frightening thing to address a legislator, right? It is frightening to go to a state capitol or a city council or a school board to address some of those issues. So we have to do a better job of teaching you and teaching our community how to advocate on those issues, because like Jason said, a lot of times you guys don't know. The members of Congress, they get a lot of media attention based on what's going on here, but a lot of times we sleep on those issues that are taking place right in our own neighborhood. So I think that we have to pay more attention to a lot of the issues that are going on locally. And I know in Louisiana, when we talk about juvenile justice, Supreme Court said that you cannot incarcerate a juvenile for life without parole. So, but they gave instructions to states to go and craft laws. I'm in a very conservative state. It's 105 of us. It's about 47 Democrats, and of those Democrats, about 24 of us are African Americans. So you have 24 that are fighting for an issue that impacts so many in our community. And what we did in Louisiana, we capped it at 25 years, and that was a struggle. 25 years, and this is only for the possibility of parole. This is not saying that you're going to, let these young folks out. But we also added, but not we. The other side added a caveat that there's this provision called the worst of the worst. And that provision is left up to some prosecutor, and the prosecutor can decide this kid comes in and I can apply for some hearing to label him the worst of the worst. Now again, those prosecutors are elected by you. That hearing would go before a judge that's elected by you, and a lot of times we don't remember those issues and hold those people more accountable. So it's a lot that we could be doing.
Thank you.
I think I can answer the question more directly. We don't usually describe bills by just numbers, usually some other kind of way. 47, the Sheila Jackson Lee's bill, has 3 provisions that means you have to record any interrogations, you have to scale back solitary confinement, and also no restraints in a court proceeding. Most of those are state procedures, so I'm not sure how much would it could take place, and requiring state procedures becomes really complicated. You can do that in federal court, and I don't think that's as much of a problem in federal court anyway. It's been introduced, apparently no hearings have been held on it, so hopefully we can make progress, because all of those are good ideas. 114 requires a screening of social media before you let somebody into the country. Is that what you understand? Okay, well, I would assume that screening social media, if somebody's applied, you just do a routine search to see what they're saying to people to know whether they were appropriate or not. That hasn't made much progress either, but I would assume that's going on already.
All right, now I want to follow up on State Representative James' comments. He's making some very insightful comments about the Supreme Court order and decision and order to address the life sentencing of juveniles, which they overturned, and in each jurisdiction, prosecutorial jurisdiction, they've been ordered to apply for resentencing, or to bring juvenile life those who are sentenced to life, those juveniles, to bring them before the judge for resentencing. In Michigan, where I live, in Detroit specifically, our county prosecutor was struggling with that. She's pretty tough on violent criminals in particular, and wants to get them off the street. But once they are off the street and in prison, I don't know if I know they don't deserve life. And one of the reasons is that the Supreme Court followed science in this area, and science and has instructed and determined that the minds of juveniles have not matured and developed enough to be able to totally appreciate the actions, the impulsiveness, the recklessness that we all engaged in as youth. Unfortunately, our youth have been given guns and drugs, and their recklessness and impulsiveness is manifested in heinous crimes. So I'm glad that he pointed that out. And also, it gives me an opportunity to introduce our Chief of Police of the Sheriff's Office. He's one of my dearest friends in Wayne County, which covers Detroit and several other jurisdictions. Michael Turner, give him a hand, Mr. Turner, Sheriff Turner. All right. Why did it take you so long to stand up? You need to stop eating. All right. Our next question, please. You didn't think I was going to get Janice and not get you, did you? Yes, ma'am.
Good afternoon. My name is Carolyn Hunter. I was a federal prosecutor for about 14 years in Miami and in Atlanta and a short time in D.C. And as you mentioned, we very rarely, if ever, I've never had a juvenile justice issue, technically speaking. However, I did encounter a number of, especially in Atlanta, students who were at Spelman Morehouse or recently graduated from Spelman Morehouse. So my question actually is for the Congress people. In trying to figure out ways to address issues with them short of federal felonies, it's very difficult to work around the current law to help those kids because they fall into the category of doing dumb stuff, but it's still bank fraud. You know, it's still wire fraud. And so from a legislative perspective, it would be helpful if, for example, when you spoke about the research on developmental ages, making juvenile, the category juvenile, a little bit higher in age. I mean, that's a legislative fix. Also, federal prosecutors, some would like to have alternatives to prosecution, like pretrial diversion, different things like that, offered in the state system, but not so much in the federal system. So I think that when we're talking about ways to keep the group of people, young people who just do dumb stuff, from having federal felonies on their records, which obviously would prevent them, regardless of their college degrees, from being able to move forward. Most of that stuff needs to occur from a legislative perspective and then sort of pushed out through the Department of Justice to allow prosecutors to have some discretion to use tools like that if they're developed.
I'll start on that. Police officers, prosecutors, and others enforce the laws that are on the books. And dumb stuff, if dumb stuff equals breaking the law, i.e. Bank fraud, then it's breaking the law. Now, you talked about pretrial diversion and other programs like that. The issue with those, and we're glad they are available, but they are, they're not mandatorily given. And so it kind of goes back to when the state rep talked about many people do not know, may not be involved through any fault of your own. In order to change, the best way to handle college students who could have a bright future that do dumb stuff is to teach them not to do dumb stuff. But then you've got to change the law, because as long as it is on the books as a law and there's no other program alternative to, or the judge does not make the decision to put them through pretrial or prosecutor, then they always run the risk of being convicted and having that appear on their record. Bobby, you want to?
Yeah, I'm sure if you're a federal prosecutor, you weren't dealing with that many juveniles anyway, unless they were roped in on a drug conspiracy, they happen to be involved. And that's why the whole juvenile, dealing with juveniles in the federal code makes very little sense because it covers so few people. The prosecutors do have discretion. They have charging decisions, and you saw the difference in policy when Eric Holder said that prosecutors ought to charge in such a way as to avoid, to the extent possible, mandatory minimum sentences. And now Sessions comes in and says, on the other hand, we're going to now start charging every kind of different way you can, including maximizing the use of mandatory minimums. So that's policy in terms of how to use the discretion. Now, one of the problems we have with the criminal justice system, including mandatory minimums, is that the code section often does not represent a real good, in all cases, the seriousness of the crime. Armed robbery can be anything from taking a firearm, threatening people in the 7-Eleven, and it could mean a kid in the lunch line at school with a pencil, give me your lunch money. Well, they both fall under the same technical code section, but you wouldn't expect the punishment to be the same, and in fact, you wouldn't want to expect the prosecutorial discretion to be the same. And that's why the mandatory minimums make no sense, because whether it makes sense or not, it's got to be imposed, the whole mandatory minimum. And so the number of juveniles is low, but prosecutorial discretion you got to have, using the political system, make sure the people in the position to use discretion are using it, as the judge said, in such a way that reflects the community.
And we're going to have our prosecutor turned criminal defense lawyer give us some insight in that area.
Okay, so the reason why I wasn't paying attention to the question asked before is because I was looking up some stats. And according to the American Bar...
Looking at her Instagram and her Facebook. And a young man on there. He looked young, and they were about to talk.
Okay, so let me give you the stats. So according to the American Bar Association, 88% of lawyers are white, 4.8% are black, 95% of prosecutors are white, and 79% are male. Those numbers need to drastically change. So I was blessed enough to start my career as a prosecutor in Dallas County for the first black DA elected there, Craig Watkins. And because of him, he hired lots of black prosecutors because I think the person that was previously in that position only had maybe about 3, and Dallas County is pretty large. So that goes back to how important local elections are. You got to put these people in places of power. So prosecuted adult cases. There was an opportunity for someone to go to the juvenile department, and nobody wanted to go at all. It was one of those things where it was sort of taboo to go over there. You'll never come back to the adult. So I said, you know what, I'll do it. I want to go and do it. And it was probably the best decision I think I've ever made. I went over there and started realizing how we're just not around. And when I say we're, I was talking to Ted about this yesterday. We don't have enough black attorneys. We don't have enough defense attorneys that are defending and advocating for these young kids. We don't have black prosecutors who can have discretion, because as a prosecutor, I was dismissing cases. I had a lot of discretion. And when I saw cases that came to my desk because of adolescent misbehavior being criminalized in school, I'm talking, being rowdy. You have a fight with another student, instead of them handling it in-house, they would be referred to me. Not okay. So as a prosecutor, I would use that discretion and make them do some things, get rid of it. Don't have time for it. Black defense attorneys, there's a thing called the wheel appointment. The judge will appoint private attorneys to kids who can't afford lawyers. Well, this judge would always appoint this one black defense attorney to all the black kids, because they needed sort of a father figure. And so that told me, why don't we have more black male defense attorneys? My sheer presence in juvenile court did so much for these kids. I mean, their eyes literally bugged out. Couldn't believe it. For years, they thought I was either the secretary, the judge's assistant, until I announced myself in court and said I'm a prosecutor. I mean, their world literally opened up. And that told me something. That taught me something. They need more positive role models. And so what I did was I took the skills that I learned as a prosecutor, because juvenile law is completely different from adult. It's complex. You have so many different laws. Learned what I could, then I left, started my own practice, and now I go to schools and I speak to kids about how to avoid coming into the juvenile justice system, because once you're in there, it's not going to take you long to get to the adult. There's criminalizing 17-year-olds. Why can't we make that 18? Texas has tried to pass a bill. It's failed. But trying to criminalize 17-year-olds and treat them as adults is not a good thing. I have a 17-year-old right now who I represented in juvenile court when he was 15. Committed a crime while he was on probation. Instead of violating him in juvenile court because he's 17, they took him to the adult court for marijuana. So now he has a pending case in juvie, he has a pending case in adult court, and he's sitting in a county jail with adults. He's been in there 11 days, and I was then given notification to come back to his case and handle it. Why 11 days later? He's sitting there with adults. That's doing way more damage than need be. So I say all that to say, I don't know how many of you are lawyers. I don't know how many of you want to be lawyers, but I urge you, please consider it. And if you do become lawyers, please, I know the corporate jobs pay six-figure. I know that's what you want to do, but we need more presence in the juvenile system.
Thank you. And we need more prosecutors and defense lawyers and former police chiefs in our justice system. You know, my daughter is an assistant prosecutor, Jade Mathis, over in Prince George County under Angela Also Brooks. And since she was 14, she would say, "Dad, I want to be a prosecutor." And I knew why she wanted to be a prosecutor. I said, "Well, how about just a lawyer?" "No, I want to be a prosecutor." So I would tease her all the way through her adulthood. "Yeah, what you want? Your dream is to lock up black men, huh?" "Oh, no, Dad." But I messed with her all the way through. And you know the job she holds there is a job helping ex-offenders getting second chances. That is the job she holds. So I think I might have worked on her mind a little bit. So we thank God for good criminal justice advocates and those who hold those who've fallen off accountable. Our next question is coming from...
Okay, I'm doing a quick time check, 5:30. I just saw a few hands come up, so I would like you all to make your way down here in a line so we can try to get as many in as we can. And please ask a question so we can have some fair time for the others who have questions.
That's right, no speeches, y'all. The sheriff, I got the sheriff there behind you. Thank you, Mike. Make sure no speeches. Pull them down, put your handcuffs out. Yes, sir.
Good afternoon. My name is Joshua Collins, and I work actually for the Department of Youth Rehabilitation Services here in Washington, D.C. And so my question stems around recidivism, and any one of you guys can speak to it, but my question is pretty simple. What efforts are being made to incorporate community into curbing recidivism rates? Oftentimes when we try to attack this issue, we look at it through ISOs, only from the courtroom side or only from an education standpoint. But if our ultimate goal is to get young people back home into community, into societies as successful individuals, how are we incorporating community?
I think that one of the things that we make a mistake about when we talk about community, we look to the school and the church. And the very people that we need to reach aren't in school, or they're not going to church on Sundays. So we can't be afraid to go out into the community, go out into the barbershop, go out into a lot of the areas where these young people hang out, because a lot of them, they feel like they don't have hope. In Baton Rouge and in Louisiana in particular, I know that we offer apprenticeship opportunities for formerly incarcerated. I have a friend, he's in the room today. He probably doesn't want you to tell his story, but he made some mistakes as a young man. He was incarcerated. He got out. He learned a trade. He was not he was ill afraid to work from the bottom up, worked in a collision shop. Now he has a very thriving business in the very community where he was making bad decisions. And as a community, as a city, as a state, we offer incentives for those, number one, those people to bring during the reentry programs, bring those folks in as apprentice, you get certain benefits, and then we offer certain opportunities for young men like him to offer those businesses. So number one, we can't be afraid to meet them where they are, and number two, we have to open opportunities, because if we don't allow them opportunity to make a living, they're going to go back to the same activity that they were doing before.
Thank you. And recidivism is a very challenging part of the criminal justice system. You should know that between 5,000 and 10,000 ex-offenders, returning citizens, come every year to most of our major cities. It averages between 5 and 10. In Detroit, where I'm from, 15,000 returning citizens every year, and they need someplace to work, and that's why the ex-offender movement has been so strong. The NAACP, which Mike Turner is one of the national board members, as I was in recent years, mounted the ban the box, in which case, well, the Republicans trying to ban the ballot, but ban the box is what we've done in effort to, and it's the law in Detroit through city council and the mayor, and what it does is it eliminates the question as to whether you're an ex-felon. And of course, that gives an equal ground. Secondly, we have a tax structure in the state of Michigan. We did until the Republican governor was elected, and he reversed it, and that's why public policy and your elected officials are so important. We had a tax credit program where employers were given tax credits for hiring ex-offenders, and it worked well until it was eliminated. And to that extent, we have a brother here who I'm sure he probably doesn't receive tax credits. He's doing it out of his heart. He's a brother who has 3 restaurants, chicken and waffle restaurants, and much of his work focuses on women and men who are ex-offenders. They train them there in the culinary arts. In fact, he's been awarded Man of the Year in Oakland. Give a hand to our brother Derek Johnson, Sister Muhammad's nephew. I wasn't going to mention you're part of the nation, unless he's part of the nation. I don't know. All right. Any other questions? Let's go. Next question.
Okay, let's do 3 in a row at this point just to get these in. Thank you.
Good evening. I am Keon Hardeman. I am a criminal defense attorney, but also serve as the City of Miami Commissioner deep down in the city of Miami. They're from Miami. In the state of Florida, we allow direct filing of juveniles to the adult system. Now, in the state of Florida, especially Miami-Dade County, you're having less serious felonies by the facts, as was discussed earlier, being filed directly to the adult system. Now, the problem that we're having is that when a prosecutor announces their intent to direct file, the defense attorney does not have the privilege of having discovery. And so basically the juvenile is told, you either accept this plea in juvenile court, and if that plea leads to 5 years of juvenile sentencing or whatever that plea is, that's the plea, or we will file you in adult court. And so we have a prosecutor in Miami-Dade County that will boast that our juvenile rates of being direct filed to the state, to adult court are very low. But what she does not discuss are the numbers of students or kids who are taking pleas and thus not being direct filed. And so what you'll see in the juvenile court system is someone stand, make that announcement, and then there is no defense for these children. Police officers understand this. Police chiefs understand this, etc. And so when there's an arrest made, then there's not much that is going on in trying to secure much evidence. So my question to you is, have you seen this in other states? And if so, have you seen any action towards repealing laws such as this, where juveniles do not get any evidence before they're direct filed to adult court?
Two more questions. So I really do mean it. If you could be brief, because we really do want to accommodate these questions. Actually, you were next. I'm just trying to follow yeah, go ahead.
Good evening. Thank you all for all your information. I have a question. I'm a resident of the state of Maryland and had the pleasure last year of serving on a grand jury for the first time. And my eyes were completely open to the process. But I'm wondering, I was the only black female on my grand jury, and one of 4 black people on the grand jury. And I noticed this huge stigma. I guess it's, pervasive in a lot of communities, but especially the black community, that we don't want to do jury duty. Everybody runs from jury duty like the plague. But that was my first opportunity to actually see that by us foregoing our right to serve on grand jury, we're part of the problem. We're, giving way for minorities, for people of color to be overcharged. So my question is, I apologize. My question is, what can we do to try to encourage our community to be more active in jury service? And what can we do as non-lawyers to advocate getting more involved in the process to elect prosecutors as well as judges that are affecting us every day? Thank you.
We still got one more question. Thank you.
3 things we can do to legislate. Number 1, make the police officer live in the city that they want to police in. Residency. It will help. Consider it. We need to look at the M codes. Same police officer hired in ain't the same police officer 10 years later, and we need legislation to look at how you become a police officer. Too many restrictions on the past. If I try to join, I'm automatically not being able to look at as a juvenile. Need to legislate that. And alternatives to incarceration. We took a jail of 3,000, put people on tether. If I'm scared of you, keep you locked up. If I'm mad at you, put you on a tether. Can we help legislate those types of things? Costs $155 a day to incarcerate someone in my jail. $25 to put them on tether, and we make them pay for it.
Thank you. The panel can answer any of the questions.
Can I just respond to what he just said? I want to just put this plug in right now. Tomorrow I'll be sponsoring a workshop. Tomorrow starting at 9 o'clock. The title is Stop the Bleeding, Rebuilding Our Black Neighborhoods. And the panel will consist of all African American chiefs of police and sheriffs. And one of the topics, we'll be talking about everything that we've talked about here and some stuff we didn't talk about here, but one of the topics that we will talk about is hiring and recruitment, and some of the challenges of hiring and recruitment, and how we really need the communities. When we talk about hire the brightest and the best, many times they're in our communities, but we have to go get them. And so that will be a major topic tomorrow. So thank you so much for bringing that up. And I invite all of you to please join us as we have that discussion. Thank you. I live in Florida for the other question. So I feel your pain about juveniles being direct filed. So I'll hear from one of my panelists from another state. Thank you all.
I just want to talk about the grand jury question.
Jury duty.
Serving jury duty. I get so annoyed because my friends will call me and say, hey, what can I do to get out of jury duty? And my response is a dial tone. Like, I really do hang up on my friends. I don't know how to convince or to encourage people to serve as jurors. I don't know why the coverage of all of the cases that end up being either no billed or not guilty isn't enough for people to say, you know what, if I wanted different results in these cases, then I need to get up and actually serve as a juror. I don't understand. So that alone should motivate every single one of you to actually go to jury duty, because you don't know what case you're going to be sitting on and what difference you can make and what perspective you can add to that deliberating room when y'all are going over the evidence, because people see evidence differently. And it's all according to your own experiences. And I think Ted wants to add something to the topic.
Outside of being a state representative, I'm a criminal defense attorney, and that it irks me. And when folks call me about it, my response is almost to call to make sure that they not only go but get picked, because we have, especially for my cases. But I had a case, and there's a jury panel of 50, right? Out of 50, 8 were African American. The first African American gets up and she was talking about her neighbor had died and she had to prepare for the repast. Another lady was talking about how she had back pain and couldn't sit that long. And I'm just sitting there furious because I only got 8, right? And so I don't know how we I'm looking at legislation to force more black people to go, because I think the only time that you realize, and it's not, I want to correct the young lady, not correct her, but suggest something. It's not a right, it's more of a duty. That you have, because you can be that one voice of reason, and I don't know how we do it other than someone like the young lady having that experience. But for you, I would hope that you would share that with some of your friends and colleagues. But it's very important, you guys. Please do not dodge it, because you may be the only voice of reason on that day.
One of the things that on jury duty, that's one of the parts of the criminal justice system that we have to participate in. You got to elect the right prosecutors, you got to get the right judges appointed, you got to have police chiefs and police departments appointed by the politicians, somebody that's going to do the right thing, and the jury service. You're sitting up there. If you don't like what the jury did, you can't complain if all of us are backing out. On trying juveniles as adults, if you do the adult crime, you do the adult time. That's great theater, and every study of that slogan has concluded that you will increase the crime rate and probably reduce the punishment that the children will get. You talked about Florida. There was a study in Florida where they looked at 4,500 children that were tried as adults. 85% of them walked out of court. Either not guilty, suspended sentence, or something, walked out of court. Now, why couldn't the juvenile court done something about it, where the juvenile court judge can impose education, psychological services, even family services, while the adult court, you got a choice. You can lock them up with adult murderers, rapists, and drug dealers, or let them walk out of the court. Guess which one will commit a crime sooner, depending on where they went. It makes no sense to try them as adults. Talking about direct file, they shouldn't be tried as adults anyway. And finally, as alternatives to incarceration, there are a lot of alternatives that make sense. First of all, if you're saving money on an alternative, you ought to use that money for prevention and early intervention services. That way you really double the impact. But if you're jailed, even for a short period of time, you're going to probably lose your job, you're going to lose your home. So you come out of jail, even if not guilty, you're sitting over here with no job and no home. Guess. Huh?
You say I'm sitting over here with no job and home. I have a job and a home.
Well, not if you've been sitting in jail for 30 days.
Oh, no, you pointed at me.
I wasn't pointing at you. There you are.
Oh,
without a job or a home. And so how you going to get back on your feet? Probably commit another crime. The idea that we impose cash bail where people who can come up with the money get to walk, those that can't come up with the money get to stay in jail and suffer all of the adverse consequences, including not being able to help your defense lawyer round up the witnesses because you're sitting up in jail, is a system that needs to be reviewed. We need to have systems where whether you spend time in jail pre-trial is a function of your dangerousness, not on how wealthy you are.
Thank you, Congressman Scott. We got time for 2 minutes each for the wrap-up.
Yes, and I do want to just get these last 3 questions in, and then we'll turn it over to you to finish.
And before we get there, I got a 10-second observation. It's a funny observation. When I was on jury duty last, a few years ago, one of the prospective jurors, they had the big panel, and so we're sitting there, and when the one woman, they asked why you wouldn't be able to serve, she said, huh? Yeah, she couldn't hear, and so when they finally got to her, she said, I can't hear, so okay, we're going to strike her. So I said, this woman just tricking. And so sure enough, I'm sitting like one person over from her, and so I said, I'm going to see if she can hear or not. So there's one person in between, and then that's her. I said, you know, this woman needs to lose a little weight. She said, what, Judge? What did you just say? I said, yeah, I know she can hear. Of course, they struck me under their periphery challenge because they knew that everybody would listen to me, I guess. Yes, last question.
Hi, I'm Kimberly Johnson. I'm an educator at the Essex County Juvenile Detention Center in Newark, New Jersey. I've been there for 20 years, and one of the things I've seen is students that come back, there's often a low representation of families. So how important is, well, I know how important it is and how much is needed, but what is being done to engage families of these juveniles?
Thank you for the question.
Let me say that many of, I'm sorry, another question.
I just want to get all three in.
Okay. To the panel, I'm Denise Freeman, Baptist preacher from Lincolnton, Georgia. And there was a statement made about dumb stuff. And I just want us to understand, we all do dumb stuff, but I go to juvenile court every month in my district. I see the white kids who do dumb stuff go home. I see the black kids who do dumb stuff, who have a white public defender who tell them to plead out, and they end up getting 3 to 5 years. So I've made it my life mission for the last 30 years to travel around the state of Georgia, not for money. My husband finances it, and he's a school teacher. And to teach parents what the chain of commands are, to teach them what their rights are as human beings. I am a human rights activist, and as an elected official on my local school board, I am the only one who wants to go by policy because, number one, we have enough policies to, as the gentleman who's a legislator, to deal with all those problems in-house in the school. They don't call the police on the black children, on the white children. They call, so what I'm asking you, what can I take back to my state senators and representatives so that they can pass a bill so schools will be able to handle and enforce local school policies and not do it in the court system? If you could help me with that, I'd appreciate it.
Really? And by the way, Pastor, as you said, privileged kids go to counseling, our kids go to jail.
That's right. That's right.
One more question. Last question.
Go ahead.
Hello, I'll try and be quick. My name is Horace Williams. I own a technology platform that helps people engage at the local level. I left a technology career of 10 years to go do it. The reason why I did it, and this leads into my question, so I won't be too long-winded, is that I find that there is a contextual need and a reason-based need to help people get engaged in the process, and that policy and politics all in general is very complex. And it's so complex that there are people in here that are millennial, baby boomers, X generation, everything else, that don't understand it completely. Yet the implications of those policies and those people impact children as young as 15, 14 years old, right? So my question then becomes, what are we doing, or what does everyone here have done to work at the youth level of providing policy education and doing so in a way with the context of their life?
Okay, I'll end where I kind of began, and that's speaking truth to power, and knowledge is power, and it all goes back to education. How can we make the system better? By educating and arming ourselves with the information that we need to make a difference. And that means holding workshops in your local communities, holding workshops in your churches, attending, most police departments offer citizens police academies. And when you want to know what the police are up to, that is an excellent way to get the information that you need. So when the issue happens or the incident happens, you'll be armed with the information that you need to make a difference. For the question about parental involvement, as a social worker and a police officer, I've seen and about shed tears for the lack of parental involvement for the kids who needed it the most. And so it is tough for kids to make it without someone in their lives who cares about them and loves them. And that's why mentoring programs, somebody has to fill that gap. And that's why mentoring programs are so very important. As a police chief, I started a mentoring program for at-risk kids in our communities, and police officers were the mentors. to not only mentor the kids and be there for their games and help them with tutoring and be there even for some of their counseling sessions to help fill the role that the parent was not filling, because what can you do? I mean, you can't force people. And so somebody has to stand in the gap and fill that void. Thank you. I'll stop there.
I just want to add something to that comment. The court system can't raise these kids, and a lot of my clients who are black will come into court, 95% of them, will come to court with someone who is not their parent. And if they do come with a parent, it's usually a single parent, mom. And mom is so done, she has 2 jobs, she doesn't know what to do with her kids, so she says, take them. That's not okay. So the kid feels like he's not wanted. And these treatment facilities are not going to be able to help the child without the parents' involvement. Not to mention, kids stay in detention if parents don't show up for their detention hearings and say, I want the kid to come home. So yeah, it's extremely important for parents to be involved. And so, yeah, the white kids go home because the white parents come and advocate. And I talked to a probation officer not too long ago, and he was like, white parents advocate differently than black parents. I don't want to believe that. But they don't show up enough, so.
Thank you. And the boss has told me we don't have time left other than Congressman Scott to wrap things up for us. As such, Congressman.
Let me answer a couple of questions. One, we heard about discrimination. The judges treat one group of people one way, and others. The judge is sitting up there, he sees it. How did he get there? Either you let him get elected and do that kind of thing, or he's appointed by politicians and he does that kind of thing.
Why you keep messing with me? I ain't got nothing to do, Congressman.
I said, if you're doing that, you need to elect people like Judge Mathis.
Okay, all
That's what
right.
you need to do. Because he's not sitting up there. If he saw that kind of thing going on, he'd fix it. You got to vote. Elections have consequences. You sit up and skip elections, and this is the kind of thing that happens. The other thing we talked about, getting kids in juvenile justice situation when it should have been resolved in the principal's office. There have been studies on school resource officers, and all of the studies, one study said it's unclear whether they are useless or counterproductive. Nobody said they're good and help anything, because they don't protect the children like they're supposed to. They police the children. And that is one of the major contributors to the school to prison pipeline, rounding up the children and doing that to them. So as a school board member, check out the policy and make sure everybody's doing the research on whether or not you even ought to have school resource officers. My judgment is that money could be much better spent on a school psychologist, another couple of guidance counselors, or something that will actually help the children. And since Judge said this is my last time to speak, I want to thank him, again, for his leadership in the criminal justice system. I mean, he's shown what a judge ought to be doing, not what some of the judges are doing, but what they ought to be doing, and what happens when you elect the right people for these positions. Good things can happen. And also the convener of this workshop, Sheila Jackson Lee, for her leadership. Thank you.
Thank you. And let me thank all of you for coming. I want to thank the over 120 women who are here and the 20 brothers who are here. And I point that out because it's always troubling to me. This is a workshop that addresses the issue that is overwhelmingly affects black men. And we have, as always, our sisters on the front line wanting to get the information to go back and fight. So we thank you again, and the 20 brothers, give them a hand. They want to fight as well. Thank you all. God bless. Thank everybody for coming.